The hell is this? Did somebody leave the back door open, or do we just let anybody walk in? That's what Victor Langford said when Isaiah Brooks stepped onto that stage. 16 years old, black thrift store blazer, taped up shoes. Langford looked him up and down, turned to the other judges with a grin. Damn, they got this kid out here looking like a whole charity case. You have failed. 3,000 people heard it. Nobody said a damn thing. Isaiah stood there. Can I just sing, sir? Then make it quick. Isaiah closed his eyes, and what came out of that boy's mouth in the next 5 seconds made Langford's whole face collapse. But that standing ovation, no, that's not even the real story. What Langford did to this kid behind closed doors after that night, that's the part that'll make your blood run cold. Damn, on live television to a kid. And trust me, what comes next will make your blood boil even more. Isaiah Brooks was nobody. Not nobody in the dramatic way people say it. Nobody in the way that means the world literally did not know he existed. Garfield Heights, Cleveland, Ohio. If you have never heard of it, that's the point. Half the storefronts have plywood where glass used to be. The only buildings open past dark are the churches and the liquor stores. That's where Isaiah lived, in a 2-bedroom house with peeling wallpaper, a leaky roof his grandmother patched with duct tape every spring, and not much else. Loretta Brooks was 71, walked with a cane, hands swollen with arthritis, and she had raised that boy alone since he was 9, since the day her daughter Clara died. Clara Brooks was a singer, not famous, not recorded. She sang at Mount Calvary Baptist Church on Sundays and community centers on weeknights, and people who heard her said she had the kind of voice that made you forget where you were. She never got a stage bigger than a church basement, never got paid more than a handshake and a plate of food. And when she got sick, pneumonia, the kind that starts like a cold and ends like a funeral, she didn't see a doctor because there was no money for that. By the time someone drove her to the emergency room, it was already too late. Isaiah was 9. He stopped talking for 3 weeks after she died. But Loretta noticed something. Late at night when the boy was asleep, he would hum, not random melodies, his mother's songs, the exact ones Clara used to sing at Mount Calvary, note for note, breath for breath, like her voice had crawled inside his chest and refused to leave. Loretta knew what she was hearing. She had directed the gospel choir at Mount Calvary for 22 years. She knew the difference between a kid who could carry a tune and a kid who carried something God doesn't hand out twice. So she went to a pawn shop on East 131st Street and bought a second-hand electronic keyboard for $40. It was missing 3 keys, C sharp, F, and B flat. Isaiah taught himself to play around the gaps, developing a fingering style so unusual that it would later make trained musicians stop and stare. He never had a lesson, not one. Everything he knew came from 2 places: the memory of his mother's voice and the patience of a grandmother who believed in him when the rest of the world didn't even see him. For 7 years, that was it. Isaiah sang at church, played that broken keyboard in the living room, went to school, kept his head down, and never told a soul what he could do. Because in Garfield Heights, dreams like that got you laughed at, and Isaiah already knew what that felt like. Then one afternoon, Loretta saw a flyer at the grocery store. American Prodigy, a nationally televised talent competition holding open auditions in Cleveland. Entry fee $35. $35 might as well have been $35,000 in that house. But Loretta baked sweet potato pies and pound cakes, sold them after church 3 Sundays straight until she had the money. She filled out the application herself because Isaiah said he didn't want to go. She told him, "Your mama never got a stage. You're getting one, even if I have to drag you there myself." The morning he left, she took a small gold pin from inside her Bible and pinned it to the inside of his blazer lapel. "Your mama wore this the last time she ever sang. You carry her with you." Isaiah touched it through the fabric, but didn't look at it. He counted out $342 in coins for the bus, taped the inside of his shoes one more time, and walked out the door. No coach, no resume, no training. The application asked for his musical background. He wrote 2 words, self-taught, church. That's who walked onto that stage. That's who Victor Langford looked at and called a charity case. Audition day. Isaiah took 2 buses and arrived at the Cleveland Convention Center early in the morning. The line already wrapped around the building, hundreds of contestants. Some had vocal coaches walking beside them, whispering last-minute instructions. Some had parents carrying garment bags and instrument cases. Some were doing warm-up scales in the parking lot, like they had been doing this their whole lives. Isaiah stood in line alone with nothing but the clothes on his back, his grandmother's gold pin hidden under his lapel, and a crumpled piece of paper folded tight in his pocket. They gave him contestant number 314. In the holding area, he sat down on a metal folding chair. The kid next to him was wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Loretta's grocery budget. Connor Blake, 18, Connecticut. He had an entourage, a vocal coach, a manager, a woman adjusting his collar. Connor glanced at Isaiah, looked down at his shoes, and turned away without a word. Not mean about it, just dismissive, like Isaiah wasn't even in the conversation, like he didn't register as someone who could possibly be competition. A production assistant came by with a clipboard and handed Isaiah a form. Training background, it said at the top. Spaces for vocal coaches, music schools, performance history, awards. Isaiah stared at the blank lines for a long moment. Then he picked up the pen and wrote self-taught church choir. The production assistant took it back, read it, raised one eyebrow, and moved on without saying anything. Somewhere out in the auditorium in row 12, a woman in a dark blazer sat watching the contestant lineup with a kind of focus that didn't match the casual energy of the crowd around her. She had a small notebook open on her knee and her phone angled toward the stage. Nobody noticed her. Nobody had any reason to. Not yet. The hours crawled by. Contestants went up and came back, some smiling, some crying, some staring at the floor. Isaiah sat in that metal chair and didn't move. He didn't warm up. He didn't talk to anyone. He just pressed his hand flat against his chest where the pin was, and he hummed so quietly that only the person sitting right next to him could have heard it. But Connor Blake had already moved to a different seat. Backstage, the waiting area thinned out as the day went on. Contestants left in waves, some through the front door with golden tickets, most through the side exit with nothing. Isaiah watched every single one. Then Connor Blake's name was called. Isaiah stood near the wings and watched through a gap in the curtain. Connor walked on stage like he had been born there. Straight back, easy smile. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing you have been prepared for this moment your entire life. He opened his mouth and delivered a performance that was technically flawless. Every note placed, every breath controlled, every phrase polished smooth by years of expensive training. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Langford leaned forward in his chair and said loud enough for the cameras, "Now that is the future of American vocal arts." Isaiah stepped back from the curtain. His hands were shaking. He looked toward the exit, the side door, the one all the rejected contestants had walked through. It was 15 feet away. Unlocked. Easy. Nobody would notice. Nobody would care. He could be on the bus home in 20 minutes. And Loretta would say she was proud of him for trying. And that would be the end of it. He took a step toward that door. Then he felt it. The pin pressing against his chest through the fabric right over his heart, like a fingertip tapping him from the inside. And in that half second, he wasn't thinking about the competition anymore. He was thinking about his grandmother sitting at home on the couch watching the live stream on a borrowed tablet with her Bible open on her lap. He was thinking about his mother, who sang her whole life in church basements and community centers, and never once, not once, got to stand under a spotlight and be heard by anyone beyond the last pew. He turned around, walked back toward the stage entrance. A stagehand with a headset looked up from his clipboard. Name, Isaiah Brooks. Number 314. The stagehand nodded and spoke into his headset. 10 seconds later, the announcer's voice filled the auditorium. Isaiah stepped into the light. There are two kinds of courage in this world, the kind that shows up with armor and armies, and the kind that shows up in borrowed shoes with tape on the soles, walking toward a stage that was never built for someone like him. The stage was bigger than anything Isaiah had ever stood on. Mount Calvary Baptist Church could fit inside this auditorium 6 times over. The lights were so bright, he couldn't see past the first few rows, but he could feel them out there. 3,000 people shifting in their seats, checking their phones, already half bored from a long day of auditions. Nobody was paying attention. Not really. He was just another number. Contestant 314, the kid in the bad blazer. At the judges' table, Elena Vargas gave him a polite, professional smile, the kind judges give when they are being nice, but don't expect much. Derek Lang glanced at the contestant card, scribbled something, and looked mildly bored. Langford was already writing notes. He hadn't even asked Isaiah a question yet, and he was already writing. Then Langford looked up, leaned into his microphone. "So, Isaiah, what are you going to perform for us today?" Isaiah stepped closer to the mic. His voice was quiet, but steady. Nessun Dorma. A murmur rippled through the audience, not a supportive one. The kind of murmur that happens when someone orders a steak at a restaurant they clearly can't afford. Nessun Dorma, one of the most demanding arias ever written, performed by the greatest tenors in history. And this kid, self-taught church choir, thrift store blazer, was about to attempt it in front of 3,000 people and a panel of industry professionals. Langford raised both eyebrows. He half turned to Elena with a look that didn't need words. His expression said everything. This should be entertaining. A few people in the audience laughed. Not many, but enough. Elena didn't laugh. She just watched Isaiah's face. The accompaniment track started. A soft orchestral intro filled the auditorium. Isaiah stood at the microphone with his arms at his sides. He didn't move, didn't sway, didn't do any of the things contestants usually do to show the audience they are confident and comfortable. He just stood there completely still, like he was listening for something no one else could hear. Then he closed his eyes. The first note came out low, a deep resonant tone that started somewhere in his chest and rolled forward like distant thunder. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The quality of the sound was so immediate, so unmistakably different from everything the audience had heard that day, that the effect was physical. People stopped moving. Phones went down. A woman in the third row put her hand on the armrest like she needed to steady herself. Langford's pen stopped moving. In the first 10 seconds, it was clear that something extraordinary was happening. Isaiah's voice climbed, and as it climbed, it filled the space. Not just the stage, not just the front rows, but every corner of that 30,000-seat auditorium. The sound reached the balcony like it had been aimed there. No strain, no force, just this enormous, effortless wave of sound coming from a boy who had never set foot inside a voice studio. Elena Vargas's hand rose slowly to her mouth. By 30 seconds, the audience had stopped being an audience. They weren't evaluating anymore. They weren't judging. They were just listening, because what was happening on stage had crossed the line from performance into something else, something harder to name. Isaiah wasn't showing off technique. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was singing to someone who wasn't in the room, and every person in that auditorium could feel it, even if they didn't know the story. A woman in the fifth row started crying, silently, without moving, tears just rolling down her face. A man in the balcony put his hand over his heart and kept it there. The aria built layer by layer, phrase by phrase. The music climbed toward the moment that every person who knows this piece waits for. The final word, the climax, the place where the greatest tenors in history have planted their flag and dared the world to look away. Isaiah's voice rose and kept rising. The sound that came out of him was so full, so impossibly large for his slender frame that people in the front rows physically leaned back. He hit the high B with absolute clarity, not screaming, not straining, not reaching for it, and held it there, suspended in the air for what felt like an entire lifetime. The note hung over that auditorium like a held breath, like the whole building was afraid to exhale. Then silence. 2 full seconds of absolute complete silence, and then the place came apart. 3,000 people surged to their feet. The sound was deafening, not just applause, but screaming, shouting, the kind of raw noise that happens when a crowd collectively loses its mind. People were grabbing each other, pointing at the stage, shaking their heads like they couldn't process what they just witnessed. Elena Vargas was standing, tears streaming down her face, clapping so hard her hands were shaking. Derek Lang was on his feet, clapping above his head, mouth open. Langford remained seated, his jaw was tight. His face was perfectly still, and if you were watching closely, really closely, you would notice his right hand had moved under the table. The ovation lasted a full 90 seconds before Elena Vargas leaned into her microphone. Her voice cracked on the first word, and she had to start again. I have been in this industry for 30 years. I have sat at this table through hundreds of auditions, and I have never, not once, heard anything like that from anyone, let alone from a 16-year-old boy who taught himself to sing. Derek Lang nodded, still looking shaken. I don't even know what to say. That was otherworldly. That was, yeah, I'm voting yes. All eyes moved to Langford. The auditorium went quiet again. 3,000 people waited. Langford paused. His expression was unreadable. Then he gave a single tight nod and said yes. He couldn't say no, not with 3,000 witnesses who had just seen what they had seen. But his face told a different story. His face told the story of a man who had just watched everything he believed about pedigree and training and the right kind of people get dismantled in 90 seconds by a kid in borrowed shoes. The audience cheered. Isaiah walked off stage, and for the first time all day there was the faintest trace of a smile on his face. But behind the judges' table, as the cameras cut away and the next contestant was announced, Victor Langford pulled out his phone under the table and typed a message. His thumb moved fast. His face was calm. The message was short. What it said, nobody in that audience knew. Not yet. Soon after, everything changed. Semi-final round. 20 contestants remained. The competition had moved to the Civic Arena in downtown Cleveland. 5,000 seats, national broadcast cameras. The stakes had gone from local to massive overnight. Isaiah arrived for his scheduled sound check. A stagehand checked a clipboard, frowned, and said, "Your slot's been moved. 4:30 now." The live show started at 5. 30 minutes. No warm-up. No time to adjust to a room 3 times bigger than the one he had performed in last week. Isaiah didn't argue. He just nodded and sat on a folding chair backstage for 3 hours. At 4:30, he finally got on stage. He stepped up to the microphone and opened his mouth to test it. A shriek of feedback so sharp that people in the tech booth flinched. He pulled back, tried again. A low, distorted hum. His voice came through, garbled, broken, unrecognizable. A technician jogged out, fiddled with the mic stand, tapped it twice and shrugged. "Equipment issues. Nothing we can do on short notice." Isaiah looked at the microphone. Then he looked out at the empty arena. 5,000 seats about to be filled in 20 minutes. He had no coach to call, no manager to complain, no one to advocate for him. But behind the mixing board, a man named Malcolm Reed saw the whole thing. Malcolm was a sound technician, 30 years old, working almost a decade doing live audio. He knew what equipment failure looked like, and he knew what sabotage looked like. The look on the lead engineer's face when Isaiah's mic went bad, that wasn't surprise. That was expectation. Malcolm pulled out his phone, hands not entirely steady, hit record. The live show started at 5. 5,000 seats filled. Isaiah's name was called. He walked out under the lights. The audience buzzed with anticipation. His audition clip had already hit 2 million views. People had come specifically for him. Signs in the crowd read, "We believe in Isaiah and Garfield Heights rising." He stepped to the microphone, started to sing. The sound was wrong, thin, distorted. That massive cathedral-filling voice came through the speakers like it was being squeezed through a wet paper towel. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Elena Vargas looked at the tech booth with sharp eyes. Langford sat back in his chair, arms crossed, face perfectly calm. This was the moment that should have been the end. A 16-year-old kid with no resources standing in a rigged arena with a sabotaged microphone. In any normal story, this is where the underdog breaks. Isaiah didn't break. He stopped singing, reached down, turned off the microphone, took one step back from the mic stand, planted his feet, and opened his mouth. No amplification, no sound system, nothing between his voice and 5,000 people, but raw air. The first note hit the back wall like a cannon shot, pure, unfiltered, enormous. The acoustic power of his unmiked voice filled a 5,000-seat venue from floor to ceiling. People gasped, audibly gasped, because this wasn't supposed to be possible. But Isaiah had spent his entire life singing without a microphone, in a church with no sound system, in a living room, on a sidewalk. And that broken, under-resourced life had given him the one thing no conservatory could teach. He didn't need the mic. He never had. The audience erupted before he even finished. Elena Vargas was on her feet by the second verse. Derek Lang's mouth was hanging open. Langford sat with his arms still crossed, but his face had changed. The calm was gone. Something harder and more dangerous had replaced it. He voted no. The first dissenting vote Isaiah had received. Elena and Derek overruled him 2-1. Isaiah advanced to the finals, but backstage after the camera stopped, Malcolm Reed sat in his car in the parking garage and watched the footage on his phone 3 times. His hands were still shaking. He knew what he had. He just didn't know yet what to do with it. That night, after the arena emptied and the crew broke down the stage, Isaiah walked 6 blocks to find a payphone. He didn't have a cell phone, never had one. He fed quarters into the slot and dialed the only number he knew by heart. Loretta picked up on the first ring. She had been sitting by the phone since 5, watching the live stream on a borrowed tablet propped against a stack of hymnals on the kitchen table. The moment she heard his voice, she started crying. Not sad crying, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep it doesn't have a name. Relief and pride and grief and joy all tangled together in the throat of a 71-year-old woman who had spent her whole life believing in something the world kept telling her wasn't there. "Baby," she said, "your mama saw that." "I know she did." Isaiah didn't say much. He leaned against the payphone booth and pressed his hand against the gold pin through his shirt. He closed his eyes. For a moment, standing on that dark sidewalk in downtown Cleveland, he looked like exactly what he was, a tired kid who missed his mother. While Isaiah was feeding quarters into a payphone, his semi-final performance was eating the internet alive. The clip of him turning off the microphone and singing raw, no amplification, no backup, just voice and air hit 8 million views before midnight. The hashtag Let Isaiah Sing started trending in the United States, then Canada, then the UK. Vocal coaches posted reaction videos with their jaws on the floor. Music critics who hadn't watched the show in years were writing threads about his breath control, his range, the impossible physics of an untrained voice filling a 5,000-seat arena without a sound system. A retired Metropolitan Opera director posted a single sentence that got shared 200,000 times. "I haven't heard a natural instrument like this in 40 years. Isaiah didn't see any of it. He didn't have a phone to see it on, but other people did. Back at the arena, Connor Blake was sitting alone in his dressing room with the door half open when he heard two voices in the hallway. One of them was Langford. The other was a producer. Connor couldn't make out every word, just fragments. His face changed. He stood up, walked toward the door like he was going to step out and say something. Then he stopped, his hand on the doorframe, his jaw tight. He sat back down. Whatever he heard, he wasn't ready to deal with it. Not yet. And somewhere in Cleveland, Victor Langford sat in the back seat of a black car, scrolling through the trending hashtag on his phone, watching the numbers climb. His face was lit blue by the screen. His expression was perfectly controlled, but his thumb was pressing hard enough to leave marks on the glass. Isaiah Brooks had survived. But surviving and winning are two very different things. And Victor Langford was not a man who lost gracefully. 2 days before the finale, Victor Langford made his move, not the clumsy, impulsive kind of move that gets a man caught, the calculated kind, the kind that comes from decades of navigating boardrooms, contracts, and the quiet machinery of power that most people never see. Langford had been in this industry for 35 years. He knew how to destroy someone without leaving fingerprints. It started with a phone call. Langford contacted the show's executive producers and proposed a format change for the finale. Instead of solo performances, the format that had carried the entire season, the final round would now be a head-to-head structure. 2 finalists assigned songs. The judges would choose what each contestant performed. The producers pushed back. The format had never changed mid-season before. Langford pushed harder. He reminded them politely that his production company had co-financed the show's first 2 seasons. He reminded them less politely that his relationships with 3 of the network's board members went back 20 years. The producers stopped pushing back. The new format was announced the next morning, and the song assignments told the whole story. Connor Blake received a contemporary pop ballad, melodic, emotional, crowd-friendly, the kind of song that practically sings itself if you have got decent pitch and a good smile. It was a gift wrapped in sheet music. Isaiah Brooks received an obscure contemporary art song in German, a piece built for conservatory-trained vocalists with years of classical language study, dense phrasing, complex intervals, the kind of song designed to expose every gap in a performer's formal education. For a kid who taught himself Italian pronunciation from a library book, it was a trap. But the sabotage went deeper than song selection. That same afternoon, backstage at the Civic Arena, Malcolm Reed was running cable checks when he heard voices coming from behind a curtain near the loading dock. He recognized Langford's voice immediately, that smooth boardroom baritone that never rose above conversational volume even when it was saying something ugly. Malcolm stepped closer. He pulled out his phone. He pressed record. What he captured in the next 45 seconds would eventually be seen by millions of people. Langford was talking to a member of the audio crew. Not asking, telling, set his monitor levels wrong. I want him pitchy. I want him uncomfortable. By the time he is halfway through the second verse, I want him doubting every note coming out of his mouth. The crew member hesitated. Mr. Langford, if anyone finds out, nobody's going to find out. The kid has no manager, no agent, no one in his corner who knows how any of this works. He will think he had a bad night. Everyone will think he had a bad night. That's all. Malcolm's phone caught every word. His hand was shaking, but the audio was clear. And then Langford said something else, something that cracked the whole thing wide open. I know that family. The grandmother, Loretta Brooks. She ran a church choir out of some basement in Garfield Heights 20 years ago. Her little choir beat a group I was consulting for at a regional gospel competition. Cost me a client, cost me a fee. I told myself back then that the Brookses had seen the last stage they would ever stand on. He paused. Then I meant it. This wasn't about Isaiah's lack of training. This wasn't about maintaining standards or protecting the integrity of the competition. This was personal. 20 years of personal. A grown man with a net worth in the millions carrying a grudge against a church choir from the poorest neighborhood in Cleveland and taking it out on a 16-year-old boy who didn't even know the history. Malcolm Reed sat in his car that night with the footage on his phone and a knot in his stomach the size of a fist. He played it back 4 times. He thought about his job. He thought about his rent. He thought about what happens to working people who go up against men like Victor Langford. Then he thought about Isaiah standing on that stage with no mic, no help, no one in his corner, singing like his life depended on it. Because maybe it did. The stakes were simple. Now, if Isaiah failed, and the system was rigged to make sure he did, he goes home to Garfield Heights with nothing. No scholarship, no contract, no future in music. Loretta's sacrifices, the pies, the pound cakes, the wedding ring she sold for a broken keyboard, all of it for nothing. The system wins. Talent without privilege gets erased the way it always gets erased, quietly and completely, and nobody even notices. But if Isaiah won a national platform, a scholarship, a recording contract, proof that a boy from nowhere with nothing could stand in the light and be seen. The question was whether anyone would let him. Nah, this is wild. A whole grown man backstage sabotaging a kid. Like, bro, you are rich, powerful, connected, and you are scared of a 16-year-old in taped-up shoes. What does that tell you? If that was you up there, you would be losing it right now. The day before the finale, the alliance started forming. Not with a plan, not with a meeting, just one person at a time, quietly deciding they couldn't look the other way anymore. Malcolm Reed made the first move. Past 11 at night, parking garage half dark, most of the crew long gone. Vanessa Collins was loading equipment into a production van when Malcolm walked up to her. He didn't waste time. He showed her the footage right there. Phone screen glowing between them in the dark. Vanessa watched it twice without speaking. Then you know what happens to us if this gets out, right? They will say you violated your non-disclosure agreement. Langford's lawyers will bury us before breakfast. I know, Malcolm said, but that kid deserves a fair shot. And if I sit on this, I am no different from the 3,000 people who watched Langford call him a charity case and didn't say a damn word. Vanessa looked at the phone one more time. Then she airdropped the file to her own device. I will hold it. Insurance. If this goes sideways during the finale, I will know what to do. The second domino was Elena Vargas. The day before the finale, she went to Langford's hotel suite, stood in the hallway, and said what she had been holding back all season. Victor, the format change was wrong, and we both know it. Langford leaned against the doorframe with a glass of scotch. Elena, it is a competition. The format serves the competition. The format serves Connor Blake. Connor is the more complete artist. Connor is the more expensive artist. There is a difference. Langford's expression went cold. Be careful, Elena. You have had a nice long career. Let's keep it that way. Elena left without another word, but she had made her decision. Tomorrow night, whatever Langford tried, she would use every ounce of her platform to protect Isaiah's performance. She was done bending. The third wave came from the contestants themselves. 3 semi-finalists who had been eliminated in earlier rounds found Isaiah backstage during the final rehearsal block. He was sitting alone in a practice room, working through the German art song with a pronunciation guide he had printed at the public library, exhausted, scared, running out of road. Ellie Taylor, cut in the quarterfinals singer-songwriter from rural Kentucky, sat down next to him. We just want you to know you sing for all of us who never got a fair shake. Isaiah looked at her for a long moment, then quietly, thank you. The first time anyone outside his grandmother had ever said anything like that to him. That night, alone in the practice room, Isaiah made a decision. He couldn't master the German piece in 2 days. The format was designed to beat him, and on paper, it would. So he stopped trying to win on their terms. He pulled the crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, the same one he had carried since audition day, turned it to the blank side, and picked up a pen. The song was called Still Here. He had been carrying it in his head for years. Fragments, melodies that came to him late at night in Garfield Heights. A song about his mother, about being invisible, about carrying someone's love like armor against a world that doesn't see you. He had never written it down, never sung it for anyone, not even Loretta. He wrote the final verse on the back of that paper in handwriting so small he could barely read it, folded it up, put it back in his pocket. Somewhere out in the auditorium in row 12, Lydia Cross was making a phone call. The woman with the dark blazer and the notebook, the one nobody had noticed since audition day. A talent scout for Atlantic Records. She hadn't been sent by the show. She had come on her own after hearing a clip of Isaiah singing at Mount Calvary on a local radio station. She had been building a file for weeks, performance notes, vocal analysis, market projections. She wasn't waiting for the competition to decide Isaiah's future. She was building her own verdict. Tomorrow night, 5,000 people would fill the Civic Arena. Isaiah Brooks would walk onto that stage one more time. Sabotaged microphone, rigged format, a powerful man who wanted him gone. But this time, he wouldn't be alone. The Civic Arena was full. Every seat, 5,000 people packed into a building that hummed with the kind of energy you only get when a crowd knows it is about to witness something that matters. Outside, scalpers were getting 3 times face value. Inside, the air was thick with noise. Conversations, camera flashes, the restless shuffling of people who had been waiting for this night since the semi-final clip hit 8 million views. The hashtag #LetIsaiahSing was trending #1 in the United States. It had been trending for 6 hours straight. The show was broadcasting live on national television. Millions were streaming. Entertainment journalists were lined up in the press section with their laptops open, refreshing social media feeds in real time. This was no longer a talent competition. This was an event. Connor Blake performed first. He walked out in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, hit his mark, smiled at the audience, and delivered exactly the kind of performance everyone expected. Technically excellent, emotionally competent, every note in place, every transition smooth, every gesture rehearsed and polished to a shine. The pop ballad Langford had assigned him was built for this. Accessible, warm, the kind of song that makes people nod along and feel good without asking too much of them. The audience clapped warmly. Langford gave a glowing review. Elena Vargas gave measured, careful praise. Derek Lang nodded politely. It was good. It was safe. And in about 4 minutes, nobody would remember a single note of it. Isaiah's name was called. He walked out from the wings in the same thrift store blazer, same taped shoes. The audience erupted before he even reached center stage. 5,000 people on their feet screaming, holding signs, chanting his name. He stood at the microphone and waited for the noise to die down. It took almost a full minute. Then he began the German art song, the trap Langford had set for him. Isaiah sang it, and his pronunciation wasn't perfect. His phrasing was unconventional. A conservatory professor would have found things to correct. But his voice, that impossible God-given instrument, turned every imperfection into something raw and honest and human. He wasn't performing the piece the way it was designed to be performed. He was performing it the way it was meant to be felt. The audience listened with respect. Elena Vargas nodded slowly. Langford sat with his arms crossed, a faint smirk returning to his face. He thought he had won. Then Isaiah's microphone died, mid-breath between phrases. 1 second his voice was filling the arena through the speakers, and the next nothing. Dead air. The monitors went silent. The speakers hissed once and cut out. 5,000 people heard the silence hit like a wall. Isaiah stood there, the dead microphone in front of him. 5,000 faces staring, millions watching from home. The moment stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Long enough for the panic to set in. Long enough for Langford to lean back in his chair with his arms still crossed and his expression perfectly composed. This was the plan. This was always the plan. Isaiah didn't look at the judges. He didn't look at the microphone. He didn't look at the tech booth or the wings or any of the places where a 16-year-old kid might look for someone to rescue him. He reached up with his right hand and touched the inside of his lapel. the gold pin, his mother's choir pin, the last thing Clara Brooks ever wore before she sang for the last time at Mount Calvary Baptist Church. He pressed it against his chest with his fingertips. Then he closed his eyes, and he started to sing. Not the German art song, not the assigned piece, something no one in that building had ever heard before. Still here. No microphone, no accompaniment, no amplification, just a boy's voice in a 5,000-seat arena singing a song he wrote about his dead mother on the back of a crumpled piece of paper. The lyrics were simple, almost unbearably simple, about being invisible, about being told you are not enough by people who never bothered to listen, about waking up every morning in a house with a leaky roof and a broken keyboard and a grandmother who says your name like it means something and choosing to believe her. About carrying someone's love with you even after they are gone, wearing it like armor, letting it make you brave when the world says you should be ashamed. The first verse landed in silence, complete, breathless silence, 5,000 people frozen in their seats. By the second verse, the silence broke, not with applause, with tears. A woman in the fourth row pressed both hands over her mouth and sobbed. A man 3 rows behind her took off his glasses and covered his face. In the balcony, people were gripping armrests, gripping each other, shaking their heads because they couldn't believe what they were hearing, and they couldn't stop listening. Elena Vargas was crying at the judge's table, not hiding it, not trying to, tears running down her face in full view of every camera in the building. Derek Lang had removed his glasses and was pressing his palms against his closed eyes. Even Connor Blake, standing in the wings watching on a backstage monitor, had tears running down his cheeks. His hands were trembling. Langford sat frozen. His arms had uncrossed at some point. His face was ashen. The smirk was gone. The composure was gone. Whatever he was feeling, his body couldn't hide it anymore. Isaiah's voice climbed toward the final verse. No strain, no force. The sound filled every corner of that arena the way sunlight fills a room. Not because it is trying, but because that is what it does. The acoustics carried his voice like the building had been designed for this exact moment, this exact song. This exact boy, the last note, a pure, suspended, impossibly clear tone, rose into the air and hung there. He held it, and then he let it fade slowly, gently, like a hand letting go of another hand. 3 seconds of silence. Then the arena came apart in a way it had never come apart before, and probably never would again. 5,000 people, every single one standing. The sound wasn't just applause, it was release. It was weeks of tension and injustice and fury and hope all crashing through the dam at once. People were screaming, people were crying, people were hugging strangers in the next seat. And somewhere in row 12, Lydia Cross had her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking urgently to someone on the other end. If you watched the footage back, if you paused it at just the right frame, you could read her lips. Sign him tonight. The standing ovation was still shaking the arena when the first crack appeared in Victor Langford's empire. Vanessa Collins was sitting in a production van in the parking garage, watching the live feed on a monitor. She had seen Isaiah's microphone die. She had seen Langford's face when it happened, the calm, the satisfaction, the look of a man watching a plan come together, and she had seen Isaiah sing through it. Anyway, she looked at her phone, the footage Malcolm had given her, Langford's voice clear as glass, instructing a crew member to tamper with Isaiah's equipment. Langford admitting the whole thing was personal. Langford saying, "I meant it." Her thumb hovered over the upload button for maybe 3 seconds. Then she pressed it. She posted it everywhere simultaneously. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. No caption, no commentary, just the raw footage with a single hashtag, Justice for Isaiah. Within 10 minutes, 100,000 views. Within 30, 1 million within the hour. 4 million people had watched Victor Langford conspire on camera to sabotage a 16-year-old black kid from the poorest neighborhood in Cleveland. News outlets picked it up. The story jumped from social media to cable news in under 45 minutes. The network's executive producer watched the footage backstage during a commercial break, turned white, and called an emergency meeting that lasted less than 3 minutes. When the broadcast returned, the host walked on stage with a different script. New evidence had surfaced. Judge Victor Langford had engaged in deliberate interference with a contestant's equipment and manipulated the competition format for personal reasons. Effective immediately, Langford was removed from the judging panel pending formal investigation. The camera found Langford. The same camera that had broadcast his mockery of Isaiah now captured two security personnel approaching the judge's table. Langford stood slowly. His gold cufflinks caught the stage light one last time as he straightened his jacket, turned, and walked off without a word. The same auditorium, the same lights, but this time the man in the expensive suit was the one being escorted out. Then Connor Blake did something nobody expected. He walked to center stage and asked for the microphone. "I knew something was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "I heard things backstage. I saw things, and I didn't say anything because I was scared." He paused. "I am sorry." He turned to Isaiah and extended his hand. Isaiah looked at it for a moment, then he shook it. The results were a formality. Elena Vargas and Derek Lang voted unanimously. The audience poll came in at 92%. Isaiah Brooks, contestant 314, self-taught church choir, Garfield Heights, won American Prodigy. He received the $100,000 grand prize, a full music scholarship, and a recording contract, not from the show's sponsor, but from Lydia Cross, standing in the wings with a folder she had been building since audition day, representing Atlantic Records. Isaiah stepped to the microphone. "When I walked onto this stage the first time, someone told me this was a charity audition." A ripple moved through the crowd. "I want to say something to that person and to everyone who ever looked at a kid from Garfield Heights and saw nothing. You were wrong. And I hope the next kid who comes from where I come from walks onto a stage somewhere and nobody laughs because talent doesn't come with a price tag. And dreams don't need permission." The arena rose one final time. Elena Vargas stood at the judge's table applauding through tears. And in a small house in Garfield Heights, Loretta Brooks clutched her Bible to her chest, a photograph of her daughter tucked inside the cover, and wept. 6 months later, Isaiah Brooks' debut single, "Still Here," hit the top 10. The song he wrote on the back of a crumpled piece of paper in an empty practice room the night before the finale. The song nobody had ever heard until his microphone died and he had nothing left but his voice. That song top 10 in 11 countries. He enrolled in a full scholarship music program that fall, first person in his family to attend college. Lydia Cross personally oversaw his recording contract with Atlantic Records, and the first thing she told the press was the same thing she had said into her phone that night in row 12. "I knew from the first note, the world just needed to catch up." Victor Langford quietly resigned from every board, committee, and advisory panel he sat on. No press conference, no statement. He just disappeared from public life the way powerful men do when the cameras stop being friendly. The competition implemented new anti-bias protocols, blind audition rounds, independent audio oversight, third-party review of format changes. 3 other contestants from underprivileged backgrounds received mentorship offers from Elena Vargas, who launched a foundation dedicated to young artists without access to formal training and the keyboard. That cracked electronic keyboard, missing 3 keys, the one sitting in the corner of the living room in Garfield Heights. Loretta finally told Isaiah where it came from. She had bought it with the money she got from selling her wedding ring after her husband passed. She never told him. She never told anyone. She just let the boy play. Atlantic Records offered Isaiah a Steinway grand. He accepted, but the old keyboard stayed right where it was. Corner of the living room, 3 missing keys still there. Now, let me ask you something. If you were standing in that parking garage with Malcolm's footage on your phone, career on the line, would you press upload? Drop that in the comments. And here is one for the sharp ones. Go back to the hook row 12. That woman with the notebook. Now you know who she is. And check Langford's cufflinks. Same logo as the competition sponsor. Just saying. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it. Hit like. Subscribe for more stories like this. Stories about people the world almost missed, and the moments that proved everybody wrong. Bro, this is insane. Imagine you are 16, dead broke, singing your soul out, and the judge is backstage sabotaging you. Like what? If that was your kid up there, you telling me you would stay quiet? Hell no. Drop a comment, like and share. Hashtag let the boys sing. Hashtag justice for Isaiah.